Hey, Romy, just so you know, you're as you're sharing here, just make sure you're not sharing anything you don't want to.
Earl's going to be the one that is going to share his computer, I think.
Right, got it, got it. Well, same goes for you, Earl, because we're watching you type your password in right now.
Yikes! I'm getting it together though. I got you all.
That's okay. That's okay. We understand.
It's a circle of trust.
If you need help, it's just under the sharing thing, you can pick a particular window rather than your whole screen. It's coming to life. I'm confident.
And can you all see it right now?
Yeah. Perfect. We've got a great turnout here, but we're gonna wait just a minute because, as you all know, there's always people, you're coming from one thing to another. So just hang in there for another 60 seconds and then we'll get started. Earl, that's looking good right there. All righty. Well, what a wonderful turnout here today. This is great to see everybody here, folks from north, south, east, and west, just about 100 people here. I am so glad to introduce Earl Hopkins and Romina Ruiz, who are going to walk us through social fault lines. And hopefully, this is material that we all live in our daily lives. We're well aware of the dynamics of discrimination and inequality in our country. But today we're going to talk a little bit more about how we can use journalism to overcome those and how we can sort of scrutinize our own acts of journalism to make sure that we're not leaving people out or we're not painting people in a light that's not accurate and fair and truthful and honest and complete. So Romina is coming to us live from Miami, and Earl, I believe, has made it to Austin. He's moved from Columbus, Ohio, down to Austin. He's the culture reporter in a culturally distinct city in a culturally distinct state. Romy is a national enterprise reporter, so she puts a fisheye lens on the big issues that our country and our residents here in the United States are facing and beyond. So I'm going to turn it over to the two of you. I'll keep my eye on the chat and raise any questions or thoughts folks have. But with that, Romy and Earl, it's all yours.
Well, thank you so much for having us do this. I'm going to try, or I think Earl and I were really going to try to condense what was a great training at IRE. So we also want this to be a very interactive conversation. So if you have questions, literally just like, well, you can put it in the chat and we will figure it out. So what are social fault lines? The anthropologist and nerd in me is going to start with like an academic definition because I think it's really, really important. And it's that they are these hypothetical dividing lines that will split a group into what appears to be a homogeneous subgroup based on some sort of alignment, and the UN tells us that societies today are fracturing in ways that are becoming much more tangible, with a growing divide between those who are privileged, the haves and the have-nots. And what this does is that this erodes social cohesion, citizenship practices, trust in public institutions, and I would argue also trust in journalism. And then they leave these cleavages that manifest in terms of, that manifest economically, politically, socially, and spatially. So, but what does this mean? Slide, Pearl. What does this mean, like all of this stuff, in terms of our journalism and our storytelling? It means that groupings are not only socially constructed, which is something that we started to hear a lot in the media, but they're created by people in order to keep track of people. And there's almost always a power component. What I really, really would like to drive home is that fault lines are inherently human, which means that they are flawed. And as a reporter, this means that, for example, the way in which we talk about race and gender today is not going to be the way that we talk about race and gender 100 years from now. So, if there's anyone, waiting for like a cheat sheet of like, okay, I learned my identities and I have this like, all these shoe boxes and I put these index cards like a Dewey Decimal System. I'm like, oh, okay, yep, I understand my Latinos, and I put it back. Like, sorry to say, like, that does not exist. I think the thing that as reporters we need to get comfortable with is questioning the box, right? And asking questions from our editors, from managers, from, our sources, that just because it seems accurate and because of some historical context, because it's always been that way, doesn't mean that it always is. And that's when the reporting process really starts. Slide.
And it appears my audio is going in and out.
We hear you now, Earl.
I'm kind of like trying to catch the words as they're coming in. So just let me know if you're unable to hear me. But as Romina said, like a lot of what social fault lines do is place people in these indexes, these shoe boxes, and a lot of ways, and often more than not, there's a in play, and some examples that in how they align with or the discrimination of age or gender, sexual orientation, class or socioeconomic status, language. Show you some examples of how journalism itself. So as you can see towards the larger picture to the left is an article from the New York Times. Fiends are a new Southern menace. Instead of one as a headline that says marauders from inner city prey on LA sub, in which like these headlines in and of it, things of that nature to try to, provoke certain things we now know are, just falsified or just, with a large majority of them being news organizations have actually apologized for this decades of disenfranchisement.
I'm so sorry to interrupt.
As an example.
I'm having trouble hearing you. You're dropping out a little bit, like every couple seconds. I'm sorry.
Yeah, so okay. Let me actually say I think that may be the issue for me.
Earl, were you able to?
So can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yeah, and we can see your team's chat just so you know.
My audio. Yeah. Are you all? I think that may be the issue.
Earl, I have a suggestion. What if you stop sharing your screen? I'll share mine for you, and hopefully that can free up a little bandwidth.
I think so. Okay.
So go ahead and just quit sharing and keep talking. There you go.
Earl, if you can just go back to what if you want to just repeat what you were saying about some of the issues that arise and some of the ways journalism has gotten it wrong, since that's what people couldn't hear.
Okay. And are you all able?
You know what, Romy, I think maybe we're going to have to ask you to stand in for Earl until he gets his audio sorted out.
Yeah, I was going to suggest that possibly Earl just call in on his phone. If
yeah, let me try that.
Might help.
You can also turn off incoming video in Teams. It'll still show the screen with the PowerPoint, but you cut out all those videos.
Good suggestion.
Okay. Let me try. I'll be back in one moment.
Romina, would you be willing to just carry on Earl's behalf? We can jump around if you'd like.
Sure. So basically, journalism as an institution and as a public-facing institution has gotten it wrong a lot. And what you see on your screen are some of these outrageous examples, which means that we constantly have to be doing a lot of the self-evaluation, looking at our headlines, looking at, the ways that things are covered, and, becoming open to having conversations of like, you know what, I don't like the way that I did this. Maybe we should try this other way. Like we have to get comfortable with that. Can I ask you to go to the next slide?
Sure.
So how do these divides, and then the next one, affect our coverage? So we mischaracterize groups based on stereotypes and cultural tropes. This then generates lack of trust from these said groups and subgroups. And then our coverage and our reporting is suffering from these wrongful assumptions. The next slide. Now, I feel very passionate about this. There is no such thing as a dominant narrative. What there is a dominant culture of white supremacy that makes you believe that there are, quote, dominant narratives. And so how does this, an unchecked white supremacy culture, which, I put myself as an example, like I live in every day, right? So there are things that are internalized that I have bias towards, and things that, I have, learned about and changed, and all of these things. But like we are facing this all the time, whether we want to or not. So what are like the veiled ways that white supremacy culture like seeps into reporting and newsroom? Number one, tropes about objectivity. Really important, objectivity is not synonymous to truth, right? Objectivity is synonymous to point of view. So anytime someone uses, quote, objectivity to defend a stance about how to do reporting, like that is white supremacy culture. Number two, perfectionism. Perfectionism and paternalism. And these are a little bit more nuanced. Show of hands, well, no, I'm not going to do show of hands, but like how many times has in like our journalism careers did we have editors say like, you know what, you should find someone who's a character that's a little bit more, quote, compelling. That is veiled language for I am morally judging this other person, or I believe that the readers and the audience are not going to, quote, emotionally connect. What that means is like, I think this person isn't perfect enough. And I think our readers are going to judge them as I am judging them. And so, we get into these tropes of like, sure, okay, we're trying to no longer cast people. For example, when we talk about racial discrimination, is like the trope of the angry Black man. But what we do is that then we find like the person who overcame all odds. And if what we're trying to do is check, if our job is to check the structures, right? Like we are focusing in on the individual as opposed to doing reporting about the structures that create these conditions, which is what our job is. Also, so I write about, profoundly flawed individuals because I am a profoundly flawed individual. So, you know, in the beginning of my reporting career, editors would be like, this is not this is not a person and that we should be writing about because they're an alcoholic. And I went and I did what my editors told me. And then I realized that, like, this is white supremacy culture, right? And now, as I tell my editor, I am not going to cast someone based on like a moral code or a bar that I could not keep, because I am I have made some very, very interesting mistakes in my life. So, you know, this veiled perfectionism or paternalism totally seeps into how we cast stories. Either or thinking, like when someone says this is the only way we can tell this story, you know, white supremacy culture, like why, you know? So I think, you know, how do we fight this? Well, we do our job, we ask questions about the questions, and then you ask more questions. Ed, are you with us?
Yes.
Okay, can you pick up here?
So you can go.
Yeah.
Yep. So go to the next slide.
Yeah.
So and with those oh, I'm sorry, Mackenzie.
Yeah, no, I think I just want to make sure I'm on the right slide for you, Earl. It's about the questions to ask.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay.
And so with those questions, we have more questions for you to ask to look more deeper into how we can better cover these stories and better cover news that comes our way. One of those being, how does our team and the content itself accurately reflect social fault lines? We can start with how and where are we working? Do we have reporters in the communities that we actually serve so we can better reflect the communities that we're administering these stories to? Are we broadening our sources and coverage? Are we going outside the whale-dominated voices that we integrate in our stories and actually making sure that the people of these communities are really reflected and their voices are heard within the coverage that we produce? And what do our newsrooms look like? You know, in Gannett, for example, we're really key on diversifying our newsrooms, but if you look around each and every one of your offices, you know, remotely in this case, but even in person, does it reflect the initiatives that we're pursuing? And so those are the questions to ask that will help in our pursuit of better coverage and storytelling. And I have some additional questions to ask. And Mackenzie, you can go to the next slide.
Yep, we're there.
And is our work truly accessible to all? That's always a big question. And this goes into play with people of different geographic locations, even language barriers. Like, is our coverage or news available to them for them to be able to internalize it as well? And other questions to take of note are, how are we making a transition to a diverse work culture? And are we, again, as Romina explained in previous slides, are we overly relying in general on dominant storylines and tropes to tell our stories?
So before I get to this example, I want to tackle the question that was in the chat about objectivity. So I think historically, well, it was a construction of the 20th century journalism, because if you go way back, you know, muckrakers were loved point of view. So so we came up with this idea based on you know, traditional liberal ideals, that in order for something to be accurate and right, it needed to be devoid from our point of view. The thing is that it is really, really impossible. That it has been proven by the social sciences time and time again. There's like experiments about this, that there is no true objectivity, right? So the biggest way to make, I believe, you know, a factual mistake in the reporting is to not be aware of where I'm coming from, right? Like, to not understand that, like, I'm constantly dominating, like that I'm constantly negotiating or thinking about things, that I'm an accumulation of all of my life experiences, of everything that I have covered, of everything that I am doing, right? And so when we are aware of that, and when we, you know, sort of say these things out loud, then they don't, you know, we're going to be fairer in the reporting, you know. I don't know if that's answering your question, if you want to like unmute. Jeannie?
Sorry, the mute button and I have a love-hate relationship. I just wanted to understand a little bit more about what you were saying there. We blew past it really fast. And so if I'm understanding what you're saying correctly, it's more that we need to make sure that we don't think we're just being objective. We need to make sure that we're questioning what we're doing against everything we know.
Correct. Right. So
Okay.
it's almost like separating like facts and truth and objectivity, right? So objectivity is this like this thing that tells you that because I am objective and I am, you know, talking to both people, I don't have a point of view of this. This isn't influencing my reporting. Like when we proceed in that level of like unconsciousness, this is when we perpetuate the same tropes, right? Like when we don't, like we just do it, you know, it's like automation, right? And so if we check ourselves, like, and we're like, oh wait, we're going to be more diligent in our reporting process.
So it's more of an internal construct that we're talking about. In other words, I know I have a point of view. The point is that when you read my story, you shouldn't know what it was.
Well, I think that it's yes and, right? So
yes.
For me, it's like yes, and we need to kind of openly have these conversations between colleagues, between like in the newsroom about like, you know, like about what does that mean, right? Like what is the story we're telling? This is why, for example, when January 6th happened and there was this conversation in the newsroom of like, was it a riot? You know, like how do we use these words, right? Was it an insurrection? How do we like write these stories? And it was a whole conversation. Like we are, we're kind of like hitting against like the objective way of telling this story. Like we're understanding that like there is no, that we are trying to, that we're negotiating this, right? That we're asking the right questions in order to be factual and accurate.
That really clarifies things for me. Thank you, Rami.
So so this example, so number one, you know, this was a team effort of this story. So I want to say that the reason why I picked this story is because number one, I think that we can all learn, right? So I'm not Asian American. I had never covered the Asian American community, right? And so it is possible to learn, you know, it is possible to learn and to get the story right, even if you're not covering, if it's not a community you traditionally cover. I think it requires, what it requires is asking questions and asking questions all the time. So what do I love about this story? Number one, I was put on a strike, we were put on a strike team to try and like background the victims. One of the things about questioning your sources, for example, element of white supremacy culture. There was a time in this country where there would be like police, like beat cop reporters that would be inside of the precincts, right? Like they would sit and send their stories, you know, and so we've been covering police, right? And we've been seeing all of these issues with policing. So why don't we question the information that they give us, right? So that's number one. And what ended up happening is we needed to like background the victims, and they had produced a list. They had produced a purported list of victims. One of the names was wrong, right? So like so one of the questions was like, one of the names was wrong. It was my colleague Kira, who was backgrounding and figured out that the business license and the name was not the same, right? And that gave us, I can't tell you how much lead time that question gave us, competitive advantage for like 48, if not 72 hours. So it meant that we were looking for the right, you know, we were looking for the right community members, right? Then when we got to their families, another thing is like, you know, we led with empathy, and we sort of said like, you don't have to give us this story. This is a really, you know, because people are human. And so I think it's really important to understand that that people don't have to talk to us, right? So like if we show up being like, you need to talk to me because I'm coming from USA Today, it's like, I don't care. Like, you know, this is a family member. Like we talk to people on, most of the time we talk to people on the worst days of their lives. So, you know, I know this is being recorded. So like, don't be an asshole, right? Like you know, you're doing your job, but like, don't be an asshole. And when you lead with, questions, so there was this entire, I want to say that while this was happening, because they had happened at these Asian massage spas, I cannot tell you how Twitter was going crazy and how there were already articles like being published about sex trafficking. And there was all this mischaracterization that the people that owned these spas, right? The people that owned these spas were like totally trafficking people. Like this was like the dominant narrative. Now, something happened with the name Xiao Shay Tan, because of the way that it was translated. I'm giving you all this stuff. Because of the way that it was transliterated, when you put it back to Chinese, which is a tonal language, it sounded like it meant madame. So there was all this confusion about this name, who this person was. She owned the spa, all of this. So we went, I kid you not, all the way to China to talk to her family. Also, I want to, you know, totally plug USA Today that had the, you know, that paid for a translator. i.e. I'm all about, you know, my colleagues my Asian American colleagues not doing work for free. So we ended up hiring somebody to have that conversation, and we got this whole story about the name, right? We were able to get the characters that cleared up, you know, what her name actually meant, right? This amount of dedication to even getting the name right, I kid you, this family was seeing how all these other articles were being written. And yet what that did is that we got the exclusive. They opened up to us. We were the first outlet that had a story, right? Like a narrative story of one of the victims. And they were so pleased with like the level of reporting and dedication and care that when the New York Times knocked on their door, when 60 Minutes knocked on their door, when anybody knocked on the door, they were like, nope, we already talked to USA Today. And the Washington Post and all these people had like, the only thing that they could do was like, you know, quote our reporting. And that level of trust and that level of, you know, it gave us competitive advantage. It gave us credibility. Like people like praised how we had treated this story. And it all came from like actually questioning fault lines, right? Like, and coming into it and saying like, people can get things wrong. Like what's in a name? There's a lot in a name. Next slide. So how can we get it right? Next slide. So move away from dominant stories. Think about who else could be answering your questions, right? So it's like, okay, so I have these official sources and sure, okay, I went and I talked to these nonprofits, but sometimes, you know, reporters get comfortable and then they only talk to people that are in relation with these nonprofits. So, you know, you have to build like, you have to talk to people, right? Like our job is about talking to people. Ask editors why stories are being told in a specific way. And if you don't like it, pitch the other story, right? Get rid of homogeneous storytelling. So like there isn't one narrative. And then the other one that is really important to me, you know, in terms of casting characters is be horizontal with your sources. So what does that mean? Like you ask them about their pronouns. You explain the reporting process to them. You tell them, like you sit there and you're like, look, there's off the record background. Like you sit and you quick media train them and you respect the fact, like you do not take advantage of the fact that somebody's telling you something that they probably shouldn't be telling, you know, like you are conscious and aware and are horizontal. And that is like the biggest way to like earn, I think, credibility, trust, and to do a better job in the reporting. Back to you, Ed, I think.
Yes, and here's just some steps to consider. Well, with that checklist, consider making one for your newsroom, or even consider making it company wide so you can better integrate these individuals or these organizations to tell more fully encompassing stories. Go out of your way to interview sources of varied backgrounds. Develop, as Romina said, more horizontal relationships with sources that increase transparency. And for the last two, develop an inventory to account for a list of diverse sources. It may be helpful for you to have organizations and people outlined and listed out and mapped out so you can pick and choose from them. So you're making a conscious effort to practice what it is that we're telling you to do, right? And on a larger scale, think about things that get you to the intersectionality bucket.
And so we will send this deck. If you look at the next, like, we will send this deck. I already had this like reading list and had this thing on white supremacy culture, like in the workplace. So it was, so we will share that with you guys. I see that we have a couple of questions in the chat. There's a particular comment about the paywall and subscriptions. Yes, I mean, one of the biggest things that when I look at the I will say this just as a reporter, right? Like not as a corporate executive, because I'm not. I also wonder, like, if there's all of these diverse audiences that we want to reach, but we don't figure out kind of like the business model on how to do that. I do worry that you know, we aren't reaching the people that we want to be reaching. So I just want to sort of amplify the fact that that issue is raised. Okay, any questions?
You know, Romy, if I could just speak to the issue about the cost of a subscription being a barrier to many people. We do have a program where we're willing to exchange free subscriptions for the opportunity to build a trusting relationship with the source. And this program is called Digital Advisory Groups. CJ Benjamin is in charge of it, so we're in position to do that. There's a lot of work that's gone on behind the scenes just from a technology standpoint, so that we're able to delegate a free subscription to a person. Believe it or not, our paywall sort of didn't have that switch we could flip, but that's now in place. So if you're interested in that, we're interested in doing it for all the reasons that everybody here is talking about. So CJ Benjamin or Cynthia Benjamin, as she's listed in our directory, is the person to reach out to, and we can make that happen. Let's see here. Jessica, you're saying email link to that effort. I don't quite know what you mean by that. Can you just speak up?
Oh, do we just email CJ directly, or
yeah, and she'll put things in motion for you. It's a fantastic program. It's led to all sorts of, for example, in Knoxville, where we tested it, it's led to dozens of new sources, new stories, new points of view on stories, new whole new storylines that weren't being reflected in the News Sentinel before that. And Jessica has spoken up. Jessica's speaking here. She just helped get one going. Jessica, would you like to just put a little light on that?
Hey, sure. I had to find my mute button. We just launched one at the beginning of December for the Green Bay Press Gazette. So I think we have the ability to give out 50 subscriptions, and it's a year-long process. So right now we have 20 people that are in the group. We post stories every single day and ask for their input. A lot of times we will post questions like, hey, we're doing a story on, you know, restaurants you should check out for whatever reason. Give us some suggestions. And it's proven to be a very effective way to get more diversity and like more sources, because they start feeding us stories and they start providing different insights on all the topics that we're writing about. So again, we're only a month into it, not even. So I don't have any like quantitative way to, a lot to tell you, but I think it's a great thing to do. I personally think it's super fun. And yeah, I mean, we've got a good group. There's some of the members that like just grab stories and post them and start commenting on them, which was totally not what we were expecting. So I think it's going really well, and we still need to recruit 30 more, up to 30 more members. So.
Thank you, Jessica. And if we had a need for 100 instead of 50, we could fulfill that. So it's not like you're limited to 50. These usually are accompanied by a closed Facebook group where people who are getting the free subscription also have the opportunity to interact with one another and with us behind the scenes to give criticism of our work, good and bad, what you missed, what angles might have been better, stories that are missing. Hey, let me introduce you to this source. So it's a pretty powerful tool. And it all tracks back to this idea that we don't want the price of a subscription to stop us from truly comprehensively covering our communities and having the points of view that spread beyond just who can afford $9 and whatever a month. So great. Okay, yep. And Jessica's confirming they have to close Facebook group as well. Romy and Earl, while I've been talking about that issue there, is there anything else you see in the chat that you'd like to have a chance to weigh in on?
I think we answered a lot of the questions, but if anybody have questions right now.
Romy, I have a question. So I'm Shannon Green and I work on podcast at USA Today, and I love having Romy on our show regularly, our daily news show. So I am reading a book that is helping me unpack how I think about white supremacy. And the author said, like, you're gonna need to cling to something. You're gonna need to have some sort of motivation because this is gonna be so painful, so uncomfortable. You're gonna hate this book and hate the author, and because it's an emotional thing, right? So I just would love for you to talk. Like, I just think you're just such a deeply feeling person from how I know you, Romy. And so I feel like I would really love for you to talk about like kind of just some advice on like, I mean, I'm putting you on the spot, but like how to like get a commitment, find motivation, and do like the emotional work that gets you further than surface level.
Well, I think I'm going to pay you to tell my therapist that, because she's been calling me Spock for about like 5 years. So I don't know. I'm, like I have a lot of white passing privilege, but I am like, I have a lot of white passing privilege, but I'm like a brown person in this country, and I'm a woman, and so I don't think I think that I didn't get an option to do the emotional labor behind identity. Like, I didn't get to opt out. I think like that's the difference between being white in this country and not, being white, being a man. Like, if you're a part of any power group, I think that just at a very personal level, I have been uncomfortable, in a room since I was very, very young, and I think that the fact that I come, like, my family is like so diverse and just all these things, and that I never fit in, right? And so I think that when you just never fit in, you ask other questions. But I think the reason why I use the example of the of the Asian spa shootings is because this was something where we were coming in cold, right? Like, zero knowledge of it, and it is possible to apply these learnings to something that you don't know, right? And so I would say that the motivation would be like, if you don't want to do this work, then you're gonna misreport a lot of things. And while I can't tell you what to do about your emotions, like, you're gonna, like, in terms of, it's like we're not doing our job, right, if we're not asking these questions.
Thank you, Romy. Perfect answer. Complicated like it is. Thank you.
Okay, I see this. In the past, okay, there's a question in the chat. In the past, especially in border states, reporters have misrepresented or contributed to the fear mongering of the immigrant population. How should a reporter who hasn't covered these issues before go about them? This is an excellent question. You can DM me and we can have like a whole conversation about it. The first one is like, you know, like don't just print anything that DHS says because they speak English, you know, like because they're answering questions in English. I think I'm not going to name the story, but there was something. There was a big story that came out of one of the network papers a couple years ago, and they had spent all these resources going down to Mexico, and they quoted 0 Mexicans in the story, and I was like, wow, okay, so we spend all this money and then. No, I'm lying. They quoted 1 Mexican person and it was a cop who probably spoke English. You know, like that's not okay. I think if you don't want to fear monger, you have to get the story right. And in order to get the story right, you have to ask questions, which means you have to talk to different people. And kind of, you know, really understand. So I would say, yeah, I don't know, you build sources, you listen to people, you read books, you know, about people that have been doing this longer. I don't know, that's how I always do stuff, but I don't know if Earl, if you want to answer any of these questions.
That's exactly how I would have framed it, Romy. So thank you for answering that.
Any other points that folks want to raise or questions for Earl and Romy? Okay. Well, I would just like to express my gratitude to Romy and Earl for your preparation and your thoughtfulness. And I loved how Shannon put it about deep thinking and feeling. These are, you know, huge existential issues, and we can't continue to be part of the problem in journalism. And so thank you for that. Earl, thank you for fighting through the audio and video issues. You're coming through strong now. So that was great. I'm looking at the chat here. There's people saying they learned a lot. Me too. So what I'm going to do is bundle everything up and put it in this chat a little bit later this afternoon, a recording, every link that we talked about, the deck that Romy and Earl put together, all the links that are in there, and welcome you to share it far and wide. We had 100 people on here, which is great, but we got 4,000 journalists, and the people who chose to be here probably on average aren't exactly the people who need to hear all this as much. But I think we all need to continue to remind ourselves of these things. So thank you very much, Romy and Earl and everybody, for being here. And we'll see you again soon. We do have a related session coming up next week that many of you are signed up for, which is identifying patterns of discrimination through data that Jamie Frazier and Robbie Gutierrez are going to be doing. So if you haven't signed up for that, DM me, Mackenzie Warren, and I'll get you involved in that. Thank you, everybody, so much, and we'll see you soon.